From the southeastern corner of western North Carolina, this is Folklore. I'm your host, James Hernishin. If you stick around for the entirety of this episode, and I know it's long, but I think even Democrats will find it useful, you'll hear me and my guest agree on a few things, like the lunacy of letting members of Congress trade stocks using information they acquire through privileged access to drafts of emerging government legislation, and the less than optimal response of the Federal Emergency Management Agency to the devastation caused by Tropical Storm Helene. For the most part, though, Adam Smith and I come from very different places. We get our news from very different sources. We have quite different priorities when it comes to identifying the biggest challenges facing this country. We probably disagree on how to interpret the Second Amendment. But what I think and believe is beside the point. What is important is that my guest's worldview is shared by many thousands of registered Republicans. I have no doubt that is true for most of North Carolina Congressional District 11. So I tried not to make this an ideological debate, just an exploration of why one candidate for this seat has concluded that the incumbent, Chuck Edwards, isn't doing the job that a conservative Republican should be doing. So, if you're a registered Republican or unaffiliated voter living in the northwestern portion of Polk County, that includes Saluda, Cooper's Gap, Sunnyview, and some parts of White Oak, then this episode is for you. If you're not, I hope you can still find the time to listen. While our interview wanders all over the place and sometimes feels more like an episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, what you're about to hear is enlightening and says a lot about the state of Republican politics. Adam Smith and I talked February 16th at the Hendersonville Library because the Saluda Library was closed for a staff retreat. Adam Smith, welcome to Folklore.
Thanks for having me.
I'm very interested in the notion of someone who is taking on an incumbent. That's my favorite candidate because it's not easy, but it's where all the interesting stuff happens.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's a big challenge.
Now, you've got lots of signs out there. You're not a fringe marginal candidate.
I don't think so. I mean, all the numbers that we've seen in polls are polls, and you can pull polls all you like, but at the end of the day, it gives you at least some sort of reference. And the polls that we've seen on our end and some of the rumor mill that we've heard on the other end is that in general, we're hanging out within that margin of error.
Okay, well, let's start off with telling me about yourself, you know, the 3-minute bio leading up to why you decided to run.
3-minute bio. Okay, let's do everything we can to keep it succinct. I'm now 43. My birthday just happened a few days before this interview. And I have a 4.5, almost 5-year-old daughter. So I'm a girl dad, which is always exciting and fun. I spent almost 17 years in the U.S. Army, and most of that time as a Green Beret. I've had an opportunity to deploy all over the world. I am by no means a hero. I am by no means perfect. So any sort of misconception when it comes to that sort of aspect of my life, everybody should understand more than anything else. I'm just another guy. And I just am frustrated and fed up with where we are as a country. I'm frustrated and fed up with politics as usual and politicians as usual. And when I signed up for the Army, I had talked my mom and dad into signing for me, giving me permission so I could join at 17. In hindsight being 2020, my dad was super reluctant. And I never really understood until later in life. And I finally realized that, you know, if something ever happened to me, my dad signed his permission for me to join the military. And in essence, when I signed up to join the military, I was committing to the possibility of dying for something greater than myself when it came to the Constitution. I mean, the national anthem gave me goosebumps. It still does to this day. And for that to happen, for my parents to believe in the vision that I had for myself at 17 was a big deal. But that didn't really sit with me until later in life. When I got older, hindsight being 2020, you start realizing the ideas or concepts that your parents put in front of you and have the ability to apply them. So almost 17 years in the military. And I came to Western North Carolina about 6 years ago. And we moved here because my now ex-wife was pregnant with our daughter. And she has a twin sister. And her twin sister was pregnant with my nephew, my daughter's cousin. and they were within 3 weeks of one another. And so she really wanted to have an opportunity to have that experience with her twin sister. So we came to Western North Carolina. Life happens. My daughter's mom and I got a divorce, and we live next door to one another on Highway 9. Well, we literally just finished a move like a week ago, right after snowpocalypse that came through. And that's kind of where everything happened when Hurricane Helene happened. And when Hurricane Helene came through, my ex-wife lived next door. My daughter spent time between the two homes, literally could walk 100 yards to our house or 100 yards to her house. And when Hurricane Helene happened, we found ourselves in Texas, myself and my now fiance, speaking at a veterans nonprofit event. And we all knew the storm was coming. We were watching the storm, and watching the storm build. And again, we thought, it's another big storm. Got it. It's coming through. No big deal. And then Thursday night, I'm in Texas, in Austin, Texas. And Thursday night, the night of the 26th, we lose communication about 9 p.m. with my ex-wife and my daughter. And then Friday morning, still no communication. And not just no communication with them, it's zero comms, no internet connectivity, no nothing's happening on the other side of the phone. We use WhatsApp. WhatsApp. Thank you. We use WhatsApp. We use a signal messaging app to communicate back and forth because cell service is so poor where we live out on Highway 9. So we have internet out there, and it's nothing happening. And then
Highway 9 in Polk County is one thing, but Highway 9.
Yeah. This is Highway 9 in between Black Mountain and Bat Cave.
Okay. Just wanted to clear that up.
Yeah. So this is Buncombe County, in between Black Mountain and Bat Cave, about a half a mile or a mile down river from Broad River Fire Station, the main Broad River Fire Station. So that's Thursday night. Friday morning, no comms. And then Friday morning, I can't get in touch with anybody. I can't get in touch with, her mom and dad or her sister or her brother-in-law or anybody that we have regular communications with. One of my best friends, a Girton firefighter, Jamie White, phenomenal human being, couldn't get in contact with him. God, what is going on back in North Carolina? So 5:00 in the morning, Austin, Texas, I look at my fiance and say, we got to go back. And that began kind of the next journey.
Are you kind of leading up to the thing that you reevaluated your political representation coming out of Helene? Is that what led you to decide to run for office?
Yeah, to an extent. I had a chance to work at the Defense Intelligence Agency, so I spent some time in D.C. and being in the special operations community, you have an opportunity to see things a little differently than most people. During Hurricane Helene, it wasn't the federal government. It wasn't even the state government. It was locals. It was the community. It was neighbors that were digging one another out of their homes. It was, the very first helicopter evacuation of the state. We've done a lot of research to make sure that we're not wrong about this, but it was a helicopter that landed in my front yard with me in it with a private pilot who volunteered his time and really showed up by the grace of God to get my daughter and her mom out of the middle of the mountains. And flying in was the first time that we got to see the extent of the damage. And it was insane. But when we landed that helicopter, it was a private helicopter. It was a volunteer, privately owned, private pilot, me, out in the middle of the mountains. And when we got there, the local community had already started coming together. They'd already started collaborating with one another and consolidating what materials they had and who could do what and what vehicles were still working and who wasn't washed away and who was washed away. And they were doing their own checks and providing their own services to one another. I mean, when we landed, you could hear backhoes, tractors, and chainsaws out in the middle of the mountains, good old boys getting to work. It wasn't the government that was doing it. It definitely wasn't the congressman. And therein lies my biggest problem with all of it. The bureaucratic process that we have in the United States is broken. The uniparty that we keep seeing from both sides when they vote in lockstep with one another against actions that are in the best interest of American people, that go against constitutional standards and basically fly in the face of the founding fathers. I have a major issue with that.
If I remember back in October of 2024, so a month before the election, Chuck Edwards, your opponent in this primary, was making a big deal out of criticizing the Biden administration's Federal Emergency Management Agency's response.
Actually, it goes the other direction. In October, he was singing praises of FEMA. In October 9th, he went out and publicly said that there are liars and conspiracy theorists on the ground amongst the groups of volunteers who went on CNN Live. And he said that FEMA wasn't running out of money and that FEMA was doing a great job and they weren't sending money to illegal migrants in the United States.
Well, yes, he did correct the record on a lot of ridiculous, outlandish theories. But he, along with Donald Trump on one time, they got together, I think in Swannanoa, were very critical of the Biden administration's response.
Well, I was there for that meeting in Swannanoa.
Okay.
I had a chance to meet President Trump at that meeting. And when President Trump showed up, he didn't know who Congressman Edwards was when he got there. And on October 10th, which is the crazy thing, October 9th, he went live on CNN. On October 10th, FEMA came out and said that they have to reduce their spending because in the first 10 days of the new fiscal year, they'd already spent 50% of their budget. Then we found out in January and February of 2025 that one of the reasons why there was not much money left in their coffers was because there's a large chunk of money going to housing for illegal migrants in the United States. That came out. It's the reason why the FEMA CFO got fired in early 2025. So I take issue with politicians who say or claim that they're taking actions in the best interest of their citizens and they're not connected to what's going on. So they're not actively on the ground. They're not helping their constituents. They're not digging people out of the mud. I take issue with that. And I understand that there's different levels of responsibility based on your position or your job. I get that as well. I mean, that's what we do in the military. And also, there was a lot of representation from the state that I saw far more than I saw from congressional representation. But that also goes back to the problem with the bureaucracy. The modern bureaucracy is broken.
Well, I think we can probably all agree on that one.
Yeah.
Why it's broken is the critical problem, though. Is it we're not giving them enough resources, or is it we are tasking them with things they shouldn't be doing?
Well, if we look at the bureaucracy in general, and let's separate the difference between elected representation and bureaucracy for a second. So if we look at the bureaucracy, a system of checks and balances built within a multitude of different agencies at different levels, from the federal level to the county level. And when we look at, let's just use FEMA dollar appropriations as an example as well. The dollars may get appropriated by the federal government by a group of people sitting in their chairs, pushing a button, yes or no. But then every time those dollars move to a different level, there's a percentage of those dollars that get stripped away for the administration of those funds. One. So now every level wants to get their piece or their cut of the pie, which doesn't make any sense to me because you've already operated off of a budget standalone. Why is it that you need more money to operate off of a budget you've already established in that agency or department? So what is this, free money? And then you go one step further. Once every level gets its administrative fee, then they put another series of checks and balances on the dollars in order for those dollars to go to the proper recipient of those funds. Now, if you can't see me, I'm doing air quotes in the air right now because proper recipient is very subjective when it comes to who receives the dollars. For example, Asheville put out that block grants were only going to go to minority business owners, and that if you were a white business owner, you would be at the bottom of the list. And that was the actual thing that the city council of Asheville City Council had put out as a potential grant process when they came to selecting their recipients. Now that got challenged at the state court, obviously got shut down, but that's my point. The point is that at that point, the bureaucracy becomes subjective and there's not an objective desired sort of common end state or common desired outcome that we want for everybody.
Now, this is a common problem that's been identified on both the right and the left. Mm-hmm. The fact that often project money gets caught up in completely irrelevant criteria.
Absolutely.
Right. And you can't build anything unless you hire a union workforce. You have to have all these different types of people involved in the project.
Yeah.
All of which may be worthy objectives, but they conflict with the ultimate goal of getting the actual project done.
Yeah.
And
in a timely, efficient, and effective manner.
Right.
And that's the piece that I think we forget a lot of times. When you have a multi-layer process of bureaucrats constantly trying to strip dollars. Remember, bureaucrats and representatives, two different pieces right now, constantly trying to strip dollars away out of appropriated funds. That's where we lose efficiency and effectiveness. And that's at every level. Now, if we looked at during COVID, this is an interesting consideration. Now, if you look at the way they did block grants during COVID, the block grants were appropriated at the federal level, but then they were directed straight to the counties. And when those block grants hit the counties, they had very, very, very strict spending constraints on how those dollars were spent. And if you spent outside those constraints, you had to pay the entirety of that block grant back. So there's some incentive for local counties to not just blow money on whatever, and also mitigate potential corruption risks when it comes to the spending of those dollars. And those dollars got to the lowest level possible as fast as possible so they could be put into effective use. Why is it that when it comes to disaster relief, the lowest level possible is my next door neighbor that lost their home, that's washed away, that's still not been cleaned up, that's just around the corner from the house, 300 yards from the home?
The most recent episode before this of Folklore, I talked to a woman down in Polk County who is overseeing or coordinating the response of various levels of government. And she said that typically at this point after a disaster, so 16, 17 months later, 80% of your money should have been allocated and spent, but only 20% has actually made its way to like your neighbor. What's the problem?
That is the question. And the bigger question is why aren't there champions trying to fix it? At this point, it seems, and now we cross the line between bureaucracy and representative elected officials. At this point, it seems, not all, but many elected officials seem to operate from a position where if it's not going to benefit them in their next election or not benefit them in an opportunity to generate some sort of personal return or personal gain off of an action, then they won't do it, or they obstruct it, or they vote against it, or they vote for something that is not in the best interest of the American people. And therein lies my problem. James, we have an expectation that American soldiers, sailors, airmen and Marines sign their name on the dotted line, are willing to give their life for a cause, an idea greater than themselves, the Constitution of the United States. That has been held true now for 250 years. We see it now, right? 250 years, Declaration of Independence to this year. The founding of this country had groups of people in a unified effort with one desired outcome, and that was self-governance, not under the hand of tyranny. And where we are now, when it comes to what we see, is the modern uniparty has become the modern monarchy, and the American people operate at its will versus what it's supposed to be. And I keep hearing this idea that democracy is under threat. Democracy is not under threat. In fact, democracy will trample an individual's rights just as easily as a king will. It's a republic, and the republic is under threat because when you have consolidated power at any level, especially the highest levels of the government, just like the Supremacy Clause that was enacted in the Constitution, and that's an entire conversation amongst itself. When power is consolidated at any level, especially at a centralized federal government, that's when the people lose their ability to truly self-govern. Now, let's add to that a huge amount of apathetic return when it comes to voter engagement, civic mindedness, historical awareness, and civic participation. I mean, we're in a midterms election season right now. And in the primary midterms election season, the estimates that I've seen, less than 20% voter participation. We're in a district of 770,000 people.
I think that you'll find that primaries, if you get 15%,
you're doing well.
Yeah.
Yeah. But isn't that the problem? We've gotten to a point as a group of voters that we've abdicated our position, and we say, well, you're more informed than I am. You go vote, and then I'll vote in the general election if I vote at all. Because it's to a point where I think there's a level of disenfranchisement with American voters where there's such a level of frustration. Well, my vote doesn't even matter, or my vote doesn't even count. And therein lies a part of the bigger mission. Your vote does matter. Your vote does count. In fact, the reason why a republic operates is because the people are willing to self-govern. But we're not doing that anymore.
I don't know if the average voter in Polk County really cares about the distinction between a democracy and a republic, because it's pretty abstract. I know it's important.
How is it abstract?
We do not teach that in high school.
Why?
Okay?
We used to.
Well, yeah, we don't teach a lot of things. So can we redefine? Can you explain a little bit more about your perspective on the distinction?
Well, it's not my perspective. It's not a subjective position. It's an objective position based on definitions of terms. A democracy is true and legitimate majority rule, no matter what. So if 51% says that the words that you just said out of your mouth are hate crimes, and 51% pass a law that said what you just said is a hate crime, the 51% just made a law. That's democracy. True democracy is majority rules. In a representative republic, a constitutional representative republic is what we live in. It's not mob rule by majority vote. That's not how it functions and operates. Are there aspects of democracy, again, air quotes, is there aspects of democracy involved in how we operate in the government? Well, if we look at the rules and regulations around how bills are passed in Congress, we look at the separation of powers, but specifically in Congress and Senate. If there's a majority vote, majority wins. But it's a majority vote of a small group of representatives that people voted to represent them. And the rights, balances, and separations of power are codified in the Constitution, which is supposed to bring a series of checks and balances to power across the board. So you can't consolidate power in one branch of government or the other. And there's a major difference. So when I say that a democracy can trample the rights of an individual just as easily as a monarchy can, that's because in a democracy, it literally is pure majority vote and pure majority rule, where in a representative republic, it doesn't work that way.
But you can create a democratic system that respects the rights of minorities. We have in the United States in the form of the Bill of Rights. Like the majority is not allowed to pass a law that tramples on specific rights of individuals.
That takes away the aspect of, quote unquote, the democratic process. It's no longer a democratic process.
Well,
it's now a representative republic process.
I suppose you could call it that, but it's still democratic to an extent. It's just democratic with limits.
Well, I mean, again, we go back to the definition of the term. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, is a codification of what the founding fathers believed were rights endowed by God, not by man. Now, there are some politicians that believe that the Constitution gives you rights, but in reality, it's not that at all. God gave us rights. Man codified those rights to protect those rights so that the government couldn't take them away from you. That's the Constitution. And when it comes to majority versus minority rule, when we look at the balance and separation of powers, that's the reason why we have the Supreme Court in place. So let's say the Congress decides that they want to pass a bill, and that bill potentially could go against constitutional standard or break the constitutional codification that we see across the board. Then we have the ability to challenge that through the legislative branch. And in that process, that brings balance and order back to the system, or allegedly it does.
It's supposed to.
It's supposed to.
I would suspect you don't believe it's working exactly the right way at the moment.
No, I don't think the United States governmental system is working the way it was originally designed to work, especially when you have elected representatives that go into office worth $32,000 and 2 terms later, they're worth $30 million. I've had this conversation a lot with a lot of different people, and I've been challenged multiple times. And I love it. I love being challenged. It's a great time to have an open debate. Open discourse is what keeps us from civil war, ultimately. The more tribalized we become, the closer to war we become amongst ourselves. But if we can have open discourse and challenge ideas and not identity, that's a difference of concept. The battle that I've been challenged to, which I really enjoy, is this idea that if an individual goes into public office and they go to Congress, and the challenge debate clause that's there, or the speech and debate clause that gives them the right to slander and defame any individual at any point for any reason because it keeps it fair and opportune. Well, we've taken away that battle. We've taken away the competition of ideas. And now we've turned it into, I guess, for all intents and purposes, what the Smith-Munt Revision Act did in 2013, which is an opportunity for major media and politicians to produce propaganda in order to propagate it to the American people. So there's a real battle there.
Okay, let's focus. I mean, we've covered a lot of conceptual territory there.
Sure.
Big picture politics. Let's talk about NC-11.
What needs to happen?
What needs to happen, and why you think the current incumbent, Chuck Edwards, is not doing the job you wanted to be doing.
Well, I believe that if you believe in conservative values, then you should plant your flag on that position, and you should be willing to die on that hill. Politicians don't answer questions directly. They sidestep them as often as humanly possible. I think conservative values include fiscal conservatism. I think that every time we pass a continuing resolution without putting budgetary constraints on it, we continue to raise the debt ceiling we continue to deflate the value of the dollar. I mean, look at the last 4 weeks with the precious metals market. We watched silver skyrocket. We watched gold go over $5,000 in value. And then we watched the market manipulation take place with big banks and major interests when it comes to shorting that on paper metal and have the bottom fall out of the marketplace again for those precious metals. But that's a direct representative of the value of the American dollar. When the value of the dollar deflates, precious metals value increases because there's intrinsic value to it. But just like any other inflationary aspect of spending at the federal government, every time we increase the debt ceiling without constraints, we don't have a balanced budget. We just print more money. We deflate the value of the dollar.
So you'd rather see our representatives stop doing these continuing resolutions and pass a real budget?
Yeah. Wouldn't that be amazing if our representatives did their job?
Why do you think it isn't happening?
What's not in their best interest? What's the excuse that we always hear every single time? Well, we have to keep the government open. We have to keep the government open. We have to keep the government open. What about all the entitlements that the people aren't getting? What about not paying the military? Well, why is it that Congress and Senate keeps getting paid when the government gets shut down, but the military doesn't get paid when the government gets shut down? Those are already appropriated funds that have been allocated in the projection of the next fiscal year. So the dollars are already appropriated. The dollars are already available. So why is it that we're not paying the military, but we are paying congressional representatives?
Well, I would say another question is, the Republicans own all three branches of the government, plus the Supreme Court.
Currently.
Yeah. Why aren't they all on the same page?
Well, it's the same reason why there's Republicans that oftentimes vote in lockstep with Democrats. I mean, let's just look at the incumbent, for example. Chuck's voted to keep the National Endowment for Democracy funded, $315 million fund. Now, it's a great title and it sounds good, but the National Endowment for Democracy was formed in the 70s under Reagan after a major CIA scandal. And after that scandal, they needed another organization disconnected from the federal government that was a private NGO that had the ability to conduct operations around the world, 9 times out of 10 fomenting color revolutions or soft power revolutions around the world. We've seen that transition, just like other nonprofits, into conducting those same operations in the United States. I mean, there's evidence of it right now. So there's a vote. We also see votes about, well, we're going to pass a continuing resolution and then we're going to tag in, 1,600 pages of pork spending in the CR, which can include everything from remote kill switches on your vehicle to funding a private NGO that provides sex change drugs to minors. Now, at some point, we as Americans left the realm of logic and reason and shifted into the realm of emotional reactivity for all aspects of life. And I think there are still some of us that want to go back to that place of logic and reason, where we don't sexualize our children, where we're not celebrating. I remember the idea of a pride parade was about equal rights. It wasn't about celebrating sexual acts on the street. And now we see pride parades that are grotesque in nature that aren't about equal rights. It is about sex acts in the street. We're exposing our children to those things. You walk into a public library, Jackson County Public Library, for example, 210 different titles of pornography in a child section of the library.
Well, I think you probably get some pushback from the folks at the library who put those books there. That
I don't care.
Well, I mean, it's about a definition of pornography. But
well, it's not about the definition of pornography. And when you open a book up in a child section, and that child section is for somebody under the age of 10 years old, and it shows a picture of a boy giving another boy fellatio, that's pornography. And I don't care if there's a adolescent boy giving another adolescent boy fellatio in the book. For anyone to say that that's art is not art. Now, here's my problem with it. And we'll just get straight down to it. There's 2 places where the Public Indecency Act doesn't hold any legitimate sway: in a library and in a school, because of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. I have 0 problems with that. And why is it that the further we go from removing God out of the school, God out of the family, God out of public discourse, the closer we get to, or the further we get into, the sexualization of our children? Those books don't belong there. They belong in an adult section. Pretty simple at that point. Adults have the right to make that choice. We don't let children go into strip clubs. Why would we let children look at pornography in the library?
Well, again, the way you're phrasing that, I don't think anyone would disagree with your central thesis. I'm not sure that the books that were in contention in Jackson County were.
Have you seen them?
No, I haven't.
I've looked through 3 of them. And after the third one, I had to stop because I was sick to my stomach.
Okay.
And when I say that it legitimately depicts fellatio, and it's not blurred out, and it's not edited. It is a cartoonesque of two children conducting fellatio on one another. That's just one example of a dozen examples, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, of course, I'm primarily interested in what goes on in Polk County, and we've been relatively successful in not having those kind of controversies in Polk County. So let's move on.
Sure.
I want to get a sense of where you stand relative to Chuck Edwards in the political sphere, because Chuck Edwards has been a very faithful voter for the Republican Party under Mike Johnson as the Speaker of the House.
And sure, in the second term.
In the second term, doing pretty much whatever Donald Trump wants to get done. There's been some small variations from that. There was a almost unanimous agreement of the Republican Party to vote to release the Epstein files, which still aren't all released. But for the most part, what Donald Trump asks Mike Johnson to ask his representatives to do gets done. What kind of representative would you be if you were to replace Chuck Edwards?
Well, the first thing is I don't agree with that statement. If his vote alignment with Donald Trump is definitive when it comes to what Mike Johnson is putting out, then I don't think that he would have voted in his last 5 votes that he did vote in his last 5 votes, because they didn't align with American first values. That's the first thing, nor conservative values. If we look at his first term, his votes were more in alignment with Democrat leadership and not with conservative values. If we look at, Heritage Foundation score, 68%, Freedom Index, 44%, Club for Growth Index, 54%. These are conservative, free market capitalist. These indices focus on true conservative values. He likes to tout some other scorecards, and fair enough, he has his position to do that. My opinion comes down to this: God, family, Constitution. Now, when I was in the military, you fought to defend your brothers to your left and right. That's how it operated. And you did it because you believed truly and deeply in the value of the effort that you were putting forward. If we fought terrorists in Afghanistan, we weren't fighting terrorists on U.S. soil. With the open border policies, we saw that there was a shift in those strategic considerations. We opened the borders and flooded the borders with, believe it or not, known terrorists and suspected terrorists for that matter.
Well, there weren't that many.
The estimation is over 15,000.
From what source for that?
That's from the CIA. There's an estimation of over 15,000 known connected terror members or individuals connected to terror organizations that came through the sub.
Right, but this is an extremely controversial subject because the current federal administration defines almost anybody as a terrorist. I mean, if you gang narco terrorists aren't really narco terrorists; they are drug lord staff.
Well, what's the definition of terrorism, James?
Well, that's actually a very specific thing. You're trying to use fear with the general population to secure a military goal.
It's not military goal. It is the use of violence, the threat of violence or intimidation in order to progress a political, religious, or societal ideological viewpoint. So that's the definition of terrorism.
Okay.
If you look at that definition and we understand that concept, political, religious, or societal ideological viewpoint, like I'm tongue-tied. Let's look at Islamic terrorism. Why is Islamic terrorism Islamic terrorism? I mean, if we go by the same concept that you just put out with when it comes to narco terrorism, that it's just drug lords, well, then Islamic terrorism is not terrorism. It's just religious people. And it doesn't work that way. So if we're utilizing violence in order to try to intimidate, coerce, move, drive, whatever it might be, under threat of violence or violence, in order for someone to shift their position, then that would be terrorism in its definition. So if narco organizations, drug organizations, are utilizing the violence or threat of violence or intimidation in order to shift a political desired outcome, let's say, for example, overtaking a country's presidency.
But the drug lords, I gotta say, the drug lords are primarily interested in making money for themselves.
And how do you do that?
By selling drugs to people.
No, by gaining power and making certain that other nations can't get in the way of your power grab.
I'm not an expert in drug lord psychology, but it seems to me they're mostly interested in money.
And I thought one of the operations that we did in Central South America was specifically counter-narcotics operations. And cartels are about making money, but cartels utilize terroristic tactics and techniques in order to make certain that political rivals stay out of their way, assassination and murder, terrorism techniques. Make certain that other nation states stay out of their way through bribes or the threat of violence, terrorism techniques. We look at Islamic terrorism, they do the exact same thing. I mean, Islamic terrorism utilizes the violence or threat of violence and determination in order to coerce individuals to convert or die.
Well, I guess what I want to try to get at is I think there's a qualitative difference between what, say, ISIS or Al-Qaeda was interested in and what drug lords from South America are.
What's the difference? Control and power.
Money.
Control and power generates revenue. Revenue generates an opportunity to get more control and power. I mean, at the end of the day, we can say that money drives the motivation of everything that we deal with. So if that's the case, then every nation state in the world is a terror organization. But at the end of the day, it doesn't boil down to that way, right?
Well, I know we're getting off track here. The reason I'm interested in it is because, I was a journalist for a while, and the words matter to me. And I think there is a distinction between a group of people who are doing illegal things to make money and not particularly interested in who runs the country they're operating in. And as long as they're allowed to operate and make the money, they're perfectly happy.
But how do you gain access in order to facilitate that to happen? So what you just said is critical. They want to be left alone and make money, right? They don't want to be bothered. How does that happen? Through the use of violence, the threat of violence, in order to gain a political end. And political end, or means of political end, would be, if you're a politician and you're in our way, we'll assassinate you in order to continue our operation because you're now in our way. It's the same thing. I mean, at the end of the day, when it comes down to power and money, Islamic terror operates off of violence, power, and money. Narco organizations operate off of violence, power, and money. It's the exact same tactical aspect of application, that just the desired end state is a religious position versus a financial political position.
Well, I guess I think those are two different things, but in any case, I know it's debate either way. No, but it's so easy to get distracted from what I want to talk about, and that is. I don't know if Chuck Edwards has given any thought to the distinction between narco terrorists and Islamic terrorists or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Okay, but he has been, I think if you look at his voting record.
That was a good question. Yeah, that's a question.
It's been relatively solidly on the side of whatever the White House is interested in doing.
Yeah.
He's not one of the regular group of a handful of Republicans who are voting with the Democrats.
That's not true. That's legitimately not true. I mean, again, like I said, if we look at the last 6 weeks of voting records, he voted in lockstep 5 or 6 different times with the Democrats and was one of the small group of people that did it. Out of the House Republicans, there were 45 that voted to continue to fund NED, another 21 that voted for the bill that had funding for the NGO that provided sex change drugs to minors. He was part of a minority that voted for the tracking devices on vehicles for remote shutdowns. I mean, there's a list that's actually not true. The problem that I have is this, and the differentiation is this. If you believe in conservative values, you vote in conservative values. And that's the way it functions and operates. If you don't believe that there should be a continuing resolution just to keep the government open, then don't vote to keep the government open. Force budgetary constraints. At some point, somebody's going to have to be the bad guy in the room when it comes to all the elites in Washington, D.C. that says, guys, what are we doing here? Like, stop playing this game like money's growing on trees and the American people don't matter. Do your job. More importantly, if the government shuts down, you stop getting paid. Why aren't we passing resolutions that continue to pay the military, but stop paying congressmen and senators? And I think the major difference between that is that loyalty goes to the Constitution.
That is literally what it's supposed to do.
That's what it's supposed to do.
This current government under Donald Trump has put the emphasis on loyalty to the individual.
Well, I think that we've seen that in every presidency in the last 65, 70 years.
I don't think that's fair. I don't even think Ronald Reagan had that in mind. I certainly don't think that Bill Clinton or Barack Obama had that in mind.
You don't think Bill Clinton and Barack Obama did that?
I don't remember any of their cabinet ministers behaving like sycophants in cabinet meetings, spending the whole cabinet meeting extolling the virtues of their leader. I mean, what's happening under Trump is definitely unprecedented, at least in the modern age, in the terms of obeisance and fealty required of the cabinet.
I think the difference is now more than ever before, it's reported on and solely focused on. It happened under Obama. It happened under Clinton. When I was in the military under Obama, there were things that Obama did that never got reported on. You remember when Obama sent palletized cash to Iran? In Iraq, during the operations against the insurgency in Iraq, we actually had a really good handle. The military and U.S. forces as well as coalition forces did in the region. And they had the insurgents kind of backed up into a corner. Then Obama sent plus billions of dollars in cash on pallets to Iran in a military aircraft in the middle of the night. 30 days later, we saw an uptick of Iranian surrogates, terror operations across the region, including explosively formed penetrators that flooded into Iraq. Now, it never got reported on, and this is the problem.
Well, actually, it did get reported on because I remember
the money got reported on, but the outcome of what happened from the money didn't get reported on. There was not a specific correlation between an uptick in surrogate violence from Iranian surrogates against Western forces, especially in Iraq. That wasn't put out there. We were dealing with it, but the media didn't cover it.
Unfortunately, you're bringing up some stories which were subject to a heck of a lot of scrutiny by some sectors of the media. For instance, that the pallets of money had, I think that if we were to go onto the internet and spend some time, we would find a lot of contradictory reporting on.
The claim behind the pallets of money that went to Iran was Obama's position, and you can go online and look this up, but Obama's position was that it was owed to Iran.
Yeah.
I don't care. I don't care if it was owed to Iran. Now, Iran is an enemy. Why would we ever feed our enemy an opportunity to generate more violence against American interests?
Well, because Obama was trying and succeeded in getting a deal for Iran to slow down its nuclear research program.
Now, how do we know that he succeeded?
The International Atomic Energy inspectors.
That was permitted carte blanche access to no nuclear facilities in Iran after that.
The system is not perfect. I think everybody knows. However, the consensus seemed to be that Iran was not making serious progress on its nuclear weapons research while that agreement was in place. And it was only after Donald Trump withdrew from that agreement that they ramped up their research program again.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, what did that agreement consist of? How much money was the United States paying into any organization that was directly supported by Iran after that agreement was put in place? After billions of dollars of basically blackmail money that came from, or extortion money came from Iran to Obama. I mean, that's how I see it, because I saw the outcome and the aftermath of what that money did to American soldiers in Iraq and other locations in the world. And that's where I have a problem. Now, we get into conversation about geopolitical considerations and geostrategic considerations about how states interact with states. I think people have a problem with Trump because Trump, well, he doesn't speak well. That's the first thing. I think he's a jackass. That's the second thing. But the other thing is that when it comes to wielding leverage in favor of the American people, he does that pretty well.
Well, certainly, I think there's a lot of people around him who would believe that it's in the interest of the American people, but there's plenty of others who don't.
Well, sure, there's always going to be counterpoints no matter what. Just like I disagreed with the majority of the policies that Obama put forward when it came to geopolitical considerations. I didn't support nearly any of them that he put forward.
My take is there wasn't a lot of difference between what George W. Bush and Barack Obama were doing at the geopolitical level. It was actually pretty much me.
I also didn't agree with a lot of stuff that George W. Bush did when he was doing a geopolitical considerations. But the biggest things I had issue with were basically the United States continuing to bow to foreign interests that weren't in favor of Americans. So unfavored and unbalanced trade agreements, a continued increase of payouts to things like NATO and the United Nations. When there is a dramatic difference between the American taxpayers getting used into, we'll say, not being spent with fiduciary responsibility comparatively to what American taxpayers get on the back end, I don't support that. Also, it's unconstitutional. And if we're married to the Constitution, then we have to look at what's in the best interest based on constitutional norms.
So, I mean, you support Trump's tariff strategy?
Only to an extent. Actually, not a big fan of it. Tariffs in general, I see as taxes, and I'm not a big fan of taxes across the board regardless. Like, and as an example, in the state of North Carolina, why are we paying property taxes on a depreciating asset like our vehicles every year when we have to go get it registered? Also, why is it that every year we have to pay property taxes on our homes, which is basically us asking permission to continue to live in our own home? Because if we don't pay taxes, then the government can remove us forcibly from that property and seize that property from us. So I have issue with those things. When it comes to tariffs, I'm not a fan of them. However, and I do put the however in there, if limited tariffs give us the ability to re-engage trade partners that have been unwilling to negotiate trade positions and potentially give us the ability to bring industry back into the United States and renegotiate trade deals that are in better favor of the United States rather than being completely unbalanced at a ridiculously high amount of trade deficit on our part, then I'm okay with it. Here's my pause. When have you ever seen a toll road stop being a toll road?
Well, it's like any other tax. Once it's in place, governments aren't very likely to remove it.
Very reluctant to remove them. So therein lies my issue with the tariff strategy. I've not heard it communicated when it will end. I've not heard it communicated if it will end, how it will end, or what are the desired outcomes for it to end. What's the criteria, the KPIs that we're looking for the tariffs to stop?
The desired outcome seems to be the most mysterious thing because it can't be several things at once. It either has to be a way to make a bunch of money for the American treasury, or it has to be a system to build up American jobs.
Well, I think it could be a multitude of things at once. I mean, they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, but you either stop the flow of goods coming into the country and encourage Americans to produce those goods, in which case you don't get a flow of money into the country, or those goods still flow into the country and we make a lot of money off of it, but no American jobs are created.
Well, I don't think it's an or. I think it's an and. I think we have the opportunity to continue to generate revenue at a higher level. Which again, the federal government generating revenue that's a different conversation. That's another frustration. But if you have the tariff, you have the ability to generate revenue and also incentivizes through potential tax incentives to bring manufacturing back to the United States. That's great. Increase the overall GDP production within the country. Cool. So there's a possibility and then the third piece, which I think is, and there's a real possibility of bringing trade partners, which we have seen, back to the table to negotiate a new trade agreement. So I think it could be a desired outcome, multitude of different desired outcomes. The problem I have is, what are the KPIs? What are the key performance indicators of desired outcomes that will then make the tariffs stop or reduce, or what's the shift? Where's the balance? If we're going to increase cost on one side, where do we decrease cost on the other? And if we're not reducing bloated government spending, but we're increasing potential revenue, then we're doing the same thing that we do with Social Security, which is we have people pay into Social Security, and then we take it out of Social Security and we put it in the general expense fund with an IOU from the federal government. That doesn't work for me.
Well, I would agree that it is probably not the optimal way to run that particular program. See, the tariff thing is really tricky because in addition to those two competing goals that we talked about, Donald Trump has said, in addition to that, I'm going to tax, say, Brazil, unless you do something specific with your internal politics. And that's way outside of the economic things. Well, sure it is, because he's not asking for an economic return from Brazil. He's saying, I need you to put this man in jail or take this man out of jail. I mean, it is.
Well, I haven't seen that specific report.
Yeah,
that you're talking about right now.
Yeah, we're talking.
This is in Brazil.
Yeah,
okay, I'll look it up.
Brazil has a rather interesting recent history with its presidents, right? And he was not keen with the way Brazil was treating its previous president, who was corrupt, and so they locked him up, right? And he wanted him to be freed.
We'll have to look this one up and look at it.
Yeah, but my point is simply, it is perhaps not wise to use an economic lever like tariffs, which are taxes in an up by another name, to facilitate changes in the domestic affairs of another country. That's really not what it's supposed to do. And also, the Congress is supposed to be the one in charge of that sort of thing. Tariffs are only to be used in emergency.
That's not true.
From the White House.
3 different bills that were passed in the 70s that sort of gave that kind of put Congress in a position where they advocated the constant oversight of tariffs. So those three different bills have given the president a whole lot of leeway with the ability to pass tariffs without congressional oversight.
Well, I'm sure if those issues got to Supreme Court would probably rule in Trump's favor because they seem to have ruled in his favor on a lot of other things. But which reminds me, you were a little bit concerned about consolidation of power.
Very much so.
And we've never seen so much consolidation of power in the modern era.
What do you define as the modern era?
Well, let's say since I've been alive since the 60s.
Well, I mean, we can look at historical context as a consolidation of power. We'd have to look at all of the history of the United States as a historical context for the consolidation of power. Eisenhower Roosevelt consolidated power. Lincoln consolidated power. Reagan consolidated power. I mean, every president that's ever been in position, and notice the presidents that I just named, every president that's ever been in a position has actively sought to increase and consolidate power at the executive level. And also, I would also say that I think maybe now, at least in recent history, if we talk about the modern history, so since the 60s or 70s, I don't think we've ever seen, in opposition to conservative values or views, such a huge move of what I would call the modern neo-Marxist movement in the United States, which steps away from foundational principles and values and shifts totally into the human secularism position.
Yeah, I don't disagree that there is a strain of thought that is definitely more secular than traditional American history has been. However, when you use terms like Marxist, see, I've spent the first 40 years of my life in Canada, and from a Canadian point of view, the democratic socialists like Bernie Sanders or Zoran Mamdani, they're middle of the road. And for most of the rest of the world, those guys are not radicals at all. All they're doing is saying, we're capitalists, but we want some heavy-duty social welfare nets.
That's not capitalism. That's not capitalism.
Well, it's not pure capitalism.
It's not capitalism at all. It's a redistribution of wealth. That's not capitalism.
It's called a mixed economy, is what political economists would call it.
Maybe political economists, just like politicians, will find soft words to describe hard things. But at the end of the day, when you talk about the redistribution of wealth, you have stepped away from the founding principles of what the country was built upon. And that was self-reliance, individual reliance, and that was, also community understanding. At no point did the founding fathers ever come together and say, as we as a country, as a centralized federal government, we're going to increase taxes, because there were none at that point. We're going to increase taxes so that people that are poor on the street, we can give them more money and disincentivize them or disenfranchise them from making hard work in their life.
Yeah, but it's not 250 years ago. Like, things have changed. And if you would, we can't get inside Jefferson and Madison's head, but
that would be interesting.
We can look at a few things they wrote. And for instance, Jefferson said, we should have a little revolution every 20 years because things are going to change. And that's why they came up with the amendment formula.
Sure.
Right? I mean, the government and the rules of government, the tools of government are not etched in stone, never, ever to change.
But I think intention, and I think if we read the letters, let's just go through things like the Federalist Papers or the conversations that Adams and Jefferson had through their correspondence with one another. That gives you a deep insight into the mentality and tension behind our founding fathers. And if we look at the ideas of what they were working to break away from, especially the concept of taxation without representation, we have moved into a standard now as a society where taxation without representation has become the norm, because we see an increase in taxes all the time. We're going to set up a toll road. We're going to impose tariffs. We're going to increase taxes on your property. The government at any level is going to tell you that you have to pay property taxes no matter what. And if you don't pay them, you will lose your property to the government.
Right.
All of those things step away from the idea of self-reliance and and rugged individualism. And they shift into a position of taxation without representation.
Well, I agree that it moves away from self-reliance. And I'm just saying as an objective description,
Sure.
And whether that's a good or bad thing is totally different.
Yeah.
However, when you add on without representation, I'm going to challenge you because you're running for the office of representative.
I am.
There is representation, unless you live in DC or Puerto Rico or Guam or American Samoa, where there there genuinely is taxation with no representation. And we could talk about whether Puerto Rico should be a state, right? But there is representation. We are taxed, not nearly as heavily taxed as a lot of other countries, but we are taxed and we have representation. So what exactly is the problem?
What I can't remember who said it, and for the life of me, I forget the specific reference of the quote. But what the quote was is that as soon as people have the ability to vote themselves a raise, we no longer have a country that we can recognize. And what we have done now with our representation, so-called, again, air quotes, is that we've given them the power to vote themselves a raise. We've given them an opportunity to defame and slander. We've given the ability to insider trade. So is it representation of the people, or is it representation of the person in a position of influence that wants to garner more power and favor?
Well, when you put it that way, I can't disagree.
Therein lies the problem.
Okay. We could agree that insider trading by members of Congress is a bad idea.
Horrible idea.
Does anyone ever seriously make a proposal to get rid of that?
So there's been a couple of proposals that have happened here recently that have been put up, but I haven't seen them taken very seriously. And again, it comes back to,
well, I'll tell you who does make that argument constantly.
Yeah, who's that?
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders is also a multimillionaire with multiple businesses, and he's benefited from being in office. So I don't really take his position to be serious.
My point is simply that there are voices, mostly on the left in this country, arguing against things like insider trading.
I don't know if you heard about Tim Burchett's been out there. Thomas Massey's been out there. There's been quite a few voices on the right. I'd location back on it.
I'm glad you mentioned Thomas Massey because I wanted to offer you a chance to compare yourself with him, because he's a renegade at the moment. He's a thorn in Trump's side, and he's got some, I would say, some pretty sensible thoughts.
I won't compare myself. I don't want to compare myself to anybody on the Hill because everybody is unique in their position. I will say, when it comes to your question earlier, and it ties into this, Western North Carolina, the history of the Appalachian Mountains and the history of Western North Carolina is unique. The Over Mountain Men, are you familiar with the Over Mountain Men?
Yes.
So the Over Mountain Men came down and they whipped the British asses. And in general, they sort of initiated what became kind of a long and drawn out rolling retreat that ultimately led to almost a year to the day to the surrender of British forces in Yorktown. So the history of the Appalachian people in this region of the country has always been one of rugged individualism and self-reliance. And when Chuck won against Madison Cawthorn, he said the people of Western North Carolina don't like being told who to vote for, which is interesting because he's been endorsed by Trump and a few other organizations, and he touts this on a regular basis.
The NRA, for example, was the other day.
The NRA, yeah. Which I find very interesting that the NRA would endorse an incumbent who may have had his FFL, but has never really used a gun in his life. Just is what it is. When it comes down to the idea of endorsements, when it comes down to what has to happen in Western North Carolina, I think that the people of Western North Carolina want somebody that's going to stand for Appalachian values, that's going to stand for what needs to happen here. We need to re-inject capital back into the local economy. The red tape of bureaucracy when it comes to the movement of dollars that were appropriated for disaster relief, that red tape needs to get cut, and we need to move it more efficiently and effectively. Leadership requires engagement at all levels, not just to sit in your chair or to come back to your house or to send out a van and meet with people. Leadership requires building a coalition effort, both at the federal level, the state level, and the county level, in order for these measures to take place. Furthermore, there is a lack of leadership in the conservative movement in Western North Carolina. And I think if you are the Republican congressman for the district, you have a responsibility to help forward that as well. When it comes to municipal elections, when it comes to county elections, when it comes to local district elections for the General Assembly, you have a responsibility to help push conservative values to the forefront. We don't see that across the board. And I think what Tim Burchett does and Thomas Massey does better, far better than our congressman does, and the reason why I admire the two of them the way I do, is because they have come out publicly and said, there's no common sense in this action. This bill has things in it that don't support conservative values. I'm not voting for it. Tim Burchett came right out and said, I don't understand what's happened. We've lost our minds. We've lost our minds. We passed another continuing resolution. We've increased the debt ceiling, and we have no budgetary constraints. We haven't passed a budget. We continue to spend like it's going out of business. What are we doing? During Hurricane Helene, we saw an appropriations of billions of dollars go to Ukraine. It was 3 weeks into the disaster. And we hear from FEMA that they've spent 50% of their fiscal budget, and we're sending billions of dollars to Ukraine while people are literally, me included, living in tents or cots on the ground. Now, that doesn't sit well with me. If the agenda is to take care of the American people, and if your position is to tout that agenda and your actions don't align with your words, then you are either at worst a liar, or we'll say at best a liar, and at worst corrupt and self-interest. And I don't care what position you're in.
Okay, I think we should probably wrap it up, but I want to stay on this particular topic because I think it gets to the heart of political philosophy. So Ukraine versus Western North Carolina disaster recovery.
Yeah.
Are you saying we should not have given any money to Ukraine? Are you saying we should have found money for both?
Oh, no, I'm saying that we should have not sent money to Ukraine in October when the people of Western North Carolina were in dire straits, that the American people should have come first. And there's a long list of reasons why, and let me break it down to you this way. Where does the European Union and NATO, a majority of NATO allies in Europe, where do they get their energy from? A majority of it.
Well, until recently, they got a lot of gas from Russia.
Still get a lot of gas. They get a majority of their gas from Russia, a majority of their oil products from Russia, which means that they have continued trade agreements with Russia where they're paying Russia billions and billions of dollars for oil and energy products every year. Okay. Well, we said, we're going to put sanctions on Russia in order for Russia to stop so we can gain leverage over Russia to bring them to the bargaining table for peace talks while we keep pumping billions of dollars into Ukraine. And we see no effect to the current negotiating process that we've seen across the board. Well, why is that? Well, that is because Russia continues to get funded by the European Union, and Ukraine continues to get funded by everybody that's in opposition to Russia. That makes no sense to me. There's no logic there. So at some point, we have to go back to, maybe we go to tariffs. Maybe we go to, I don't know, threatening to not pay NATO any more money, or threatening to not pay the United Nations any more money in order to bring the EU and NATO to the bargaining table and say, look, we have an opportunity to gain leverage over Russia. Let us help you find energy products from somewhere else. Now, if we become the principal exporter of energy to the European Union, that benefits the American people because it generates more revenue into the United States. If we reduce the amount of energy that Russia produces and puts into European Union, and we force their hand to take it somewhere else, we potentially gain leverage over Russia. If we can do all of those things, that's a benefit for the world, because then it ceases what we see to happen in Ukraine over and over again, because that's a travesty and it's a tragedy. And what's more tragic to me than the Ukraine, what's happening in Ukraine, is what happened in Western North Carolina to thousands and thousands of people who literally were sleeping in tents because they're American citizens, and American taxpayer dollars went out instead of in first. And that's the problem. It's about prioritization. I understand the geopolitical considerations of continuing to maintain pressure against Russia by funding Ukraine operations. I get it.
We do not want to lose Ukraine.
No, we don't want to lose Ukraine, but we're never going to gain Ukraine. We're never going to bring up peace talks to the table if we don't figure out leverage against Russia. And it has to be some level of economic sanction, because nobody's going to threaten military utilization against Russia. It's not in the world's best interest. So how else do we find leverage? And so my issue, the thing that I really take issue with, is we sent money out of the country before we sent money into the country. We sent money to take care of housing and lodging. Again, we have this information. It's available publicly. Housing and lodging for illegal migrants in the country illegally, rather than taking care of American citizens in Western North Carolina. And so while the people of NC11's district were floundering and battling, and still to this day, I get phone calls. Literally just had a conversation this morning with a lady who just moved out of her van and into a rental in December.
I say my most previous episode to this one was about the fact there are still scores of people in our county who haven't got a decent place to live.
And yet we see Chuck congratulating himself and patting himself on the back for the $6 billion that have been appropriated by the federal government. And what, 15 to 20% has only been allocated at this point. And a majority of those allocations have gone to state projects with regards to building the interstate and things along those lines. We saw a slow response to building back roads. I mean, heck, the road that I lived on didn't get repaired until September of last year.
Well, you'll find that Highway 176 in Polk County is a sore point for a lot of people.
Yeah, 74, alternate 74 coming through Fairview, heading into Lake Lure and Chimney Rock and Batcave. It's still completely thrashed between Girton and Chimney Rock. That whole section is still thrashed. I mean, there's still major, go up to the Tow River or Cane River, go up north to Relief. All that area is still disaster. So my problem with it is we have to prioritize American. If we're going to have an American first agenda, we're going to support American citizens. We have to prioritize what American taxpayer dollars go and how they go. And if they're going to Ukraine first and America second, I have a problem with that, especially in the heart of disaster, especially when it comes to our representation.
Well, the thing that I find puzzling is that we are like the richest country we've ever been.
Yeah.
Okay. Things are wonderful if you are a relatively wealthy guy in this country right now. The stock market's going crazy.
Yep.
Why can't we afford to do all the things that you want to talk? Why can't we afford to shore up Ukraine and shore up Western North Carolina?
That's a good question.
And because there's plenty of money.
Yeah. Why do we buy $10,000 toilets and $3,000 hammers?
Well, yeah. What I'm saying is, there are people who are spending that kind of money.
Yeah, but I mean, that answers the question though, James. The reason why we don't have the ability to do all the things is because money is limited and the way the government spends money is irresponsible. Why do we have a $10,000 toilet and a $3,000 hammer? We have a $10,000 toilet because we bake in pork spinning to a $500 toilet so that we have $9,500 to spend on whatever we want. We have a $3,000 hammer because we have pork spinning baked into a $200 hammer or a $150 hammer so that we can spend the remaining on whatever we want.
Everybody wants the government to stop having $10,000 toilets, right? I don't really know how many there are. I know there's a very fancy one in the White House, but my point is there is a lot of money in the American economy. It's just concentrated in a very few number of hands.
It's not, that is not the issue. That's not the issue. The issue is not individuals have created personal wealth in their life. That's not the problem. The problem is that when you have $7 trillion of annual average spending, and there's an estimated of $1.4 trillion in waste, fraud, and abuse, and we know that in general, it only requires about $5.4 trillion to run the government, then the question comes down to, why in the hell are we spending $1.5 trillion annually on waste, fraud, and abuse? And why can't we get it under control?
Didn't Elon Musk spend 6 months trying to find all those wasted dollars?
Yeah.
And what happened?
And literally was thwarted every step of the way. Literally every single time there was an opportunity to find waste, fraud, and abuse, we saw the Democrats come out of left field and actively attack him, actively go after Doge, do everything they could to try and stop the process of limiting government spending. And the question comes back to why? And it's not just a Democrat issue.
Donald Trump had a lot of problems with Elon Musk as well.
I don't know what the issues between Donald Trump and Elon Musk are. That's a personal battle that they can handle on their own time. I don't really care about that. What I do care about is if we have the ability to find it and stop it, why aren't we? And if we're not taking the action to do it, who benefits? And if it's not the American people, then it shouldn't be.
And is it your contention that Congress should have a role in finding those wasted dollars?
Well, yeah, Congress is they're the most responsible for spending wasted dollars.
Okay.
I mean, if you pass a 1,600-page omnibus bill that gets delivered to the floor 24 hours before a vote, Nancy Pelosi said it out loud, we got to pass the bill to know what's in it. That's not how we should govern.
No.
At the end of the day, that's not how this works. If you want to govern responsibly and you want to legislate responsibly, then the process of legislating, passing bills, editing bills has to change.
So this puts me in a space where I found myself many times is that you and I agree on some of the problems.
Mm-hmm.
Identifying the cause of those problems is harder. And for us to find agreement on, and for almost any two random people to find agreement on, because again, Elon Musk went on this holy mission to find trillions of dollars of wasted spending. 6 months later, he's gone. And he found a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction.
Well, I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars in wasted spending, a lot of fraud that was found. But I think, Elon, I think even came out and said the reason why he stopped was because and he felt like it was an effort in futility because nobody wanted it to change.
Like, it was just such a big ask. I mean, there's just so much inertia in the system that doesn't want to change.
Well, I mean, I would say that I have to put that in the same sort of idea. If there's so much inertia in the system and the system forces itself to maintain its current status, does that mean that we've lost our responsibility to fix it? Or do we just become apathetic to the continued efforts that it puts forward?
Or maybe Elon Musk just wasn't up to the task.
Maybe. Or maybe Elon Musk thought this is an effort in futility because the individuals in a position to maintain influence don't want it to change because they benefit. I mean, look, if you were coming after me, if you were personally coming after me, if you were giving me death threats, if you were going after my businesses and trying to burn them to the ground, which we saw happen, if you were actively attacking all these different things and saying that all I was doing was I was being a fascist and a Nazi, which seems to be the common call word for the left right now, and your entire intention, your entire effort is let's root out waste, fraud, and abuse. Let's reduce spending at the federal level. Let's potentially reduce American taxpayers' liability to taxes. Let's work on reducing the national deficit before we go bankrupt. And you want to call me a Nazi and a fascist in the efforts of what we're doing? That's madness. Well, here's a question, James. Why is it so hard to fire a federal employee?
Well, this last year, it didn't turn out to be that difficult because a lot of them got fired.
Why is it, you didn't answer the question. Why is it so challenging to fire a federal employee? So remember, I spent almost 17 years in the military, and I watched federal employees, DOD employees, who did not do their job, who didn't have reportable metrics to generate or targets to achieve, not get fired for being lazy, worthless people who didn't do their job. They were freeloaders. Why is it so hard to fire them?
Because they've got strong worker protection built into the system.
The unions around federal employees have created major worker protections, which means that we've given permission to federal workers, now the federal government being the number one employer in the United States, overtaking all other companies combined when it comes to its employee capability. It means that we have an overgrown, bureaucratic, and bloated process with way too many people that aren't doing their job in redundant positions. That's not an effective and efficient way to run anything, especially a government.
I think you'll find that most Western industrial countries have the same problem.
Well, I don't care about most Western industrial countries, fairly the United States. And if I look at the federal government of the U.S. and I compare it to a successful business, successful businesses care about bottom line return. They care about top line expenditures. They care about gross income. They care about EBITDA. They care about efficient workers and employees within their business, and they fire underperformers. Why are we doing the same thing in the federal government? Well, because the bureaucratic system has become its own, it's a self-licking ice cream cone of inefficiency.
Well, that's not a new criticism of the bureaucracy in this country.
It's not, but who's doing anything about it? I mean, Elon tried, but after Elon left, what have we heard? We really haven't heard much but criticism on Doge.
No, in fact, that story's like yesterday's.
Yeah, exactly.
So say you win the primary and you face whoever the Democrats choose. What's your priority if you win that election?
Well, if we win the general election, so we win the primary and go to general, we win the general election.
Yeah.
Well, the first action would be sitting down with the director of FEMA and saying, this is broken, let's fix it. Here's some ideas that we got from the ground. Here's some ideas we got from other disaster relief organizations. This is how we can effectively move money. FEMA needs to turn into a special operations disaster relief organization, not a bloated bureaucratic operation that can't respond.
Did you want to have like a separate cabinet?
No, I think that, you mean like moving?
Take it out at DHS.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, FEMA should be a direct report to the president. It should be through DHS.
Okay. That kind of specific tactic.
Yeah.
Is what I don't think a lot of people hear from their political candidates these days.
Well, I mean, political candidates always want to give themselves an out, and I'm not a politician. I'm a tactician. That's what I did for my entirety of my life. And being a business consultant, when I work with companies, I want to look at their operations, and if it's inefficient, we have to fix it. So when we look at the operations of the government, especially specific agencies that have a specific role, that have direct impact on the people of Western North Carolina, we need to fix those agencies. So FEMA would be the first one. The bureaucratic process of appropriations would be the second one. Block grant reconstruction with regards to appropriated dollars for disaster relief would be the third one. re-injecting capital back into the local economy through the development of business opportunity zones. Now, we've seen real estate opportunity zones around the country. Under Trump's first term, we saw this idea of real estate opportunity zones. Well, why can't we look at energy opportunity zones? Why can't we look at small business opportunity zones? Why can't we generate a tax incentive for small business owners to grow their company and generate revenue for the local community versus continuing to tax them into oblivion? So that's the next mission that's on the list. The big piece for me is I want American people, the American citizens, if they want to start a business, to start that business and create success for them and their families for generations, not for 3 days. I mean, the failure rate of most small businesses in the United States, like 90%. Well, why is that? That's because one, business is hard. Most people don't understand the concept of how to grow a business. They create a job for themselves. However, another part of that is, how much taxes do we have to pay? What are the filing considerations at the state and federal level on a regular basis? Is it quarterly? Is it biannually? Is it annually? What's the position that we have to take on all these things? The tax code needs to be re-envisioned and reformed. I think a federal tax code should probably move to a flat tax rate across the board, and we need to completely repeal the current tax code and make it go away completely. I think that has to be another major focus. So if we're looking at local effort, there's some specificity. If we're looking at national effort, there's some other potential points that we're working on or that we would like to see change. And I say we because it's not just me. Yes, I have ideas, but politicians are always the smartest people in the room. And I am not the smartest person in the room. I'm not even the smartest person in the room right now. Yeah, I had a very, very, very successful businessman once tell me, I sat in on his board meeting, and he would ask a question, or somebody would ask a question. He knew the answer to every question because he's that engaged in his business. But he would never answer the question. He said, Adam, the smartest man in the room is not the man with all the answers. It's the man who can find all the people with all the answers and bring them to him. That's how you build a team. And that's how you create sovereignty of action amongst that team. So people can become innovative in solutions and they can apply those innovative solutions to see if they work. That's where we get A/B testing concepts from. But when we spend millions of dollars to figure out why frogs turn gay, or we're sending millions of dollars to foreign countries in order to study or promote DEI, that makes no sense. That doesn't benefit the American people. And we have to refocus our efforts on the United States, or we'll lose the United States.
Sounds like a wrap up to me. So thank you. I think especially towards the end, there are people who got a good idea of what you want to do if you turn into a politician.
Well, I'll never turn into a politician. I'll do my best to be a statesman. And also, for the record, I will not do any more than 3 terms, period.
3 terms sounds about right.
3 terms. I think if we do term limits, maybe 4 for Congress and 2 for the Senate. But at the end of the day, if we win the primary, we win the general, which I think we have a very good chance to do. My life is not going to be spent campaigning. We're going to make impact. We're going to focus on desired outcomes. Campaigning has turned into this machine of raising money and feeding the political beast and winning a popularity contest. And ultimately, Congress has 8-9 months of getting work done, and then they're back on the campaign trail again.
How old is your daughter again?
Almost 5.
So 6 years in office, it's 7. So yeah, you're going to want to be back 100% by the time she turns into a teenager.
100%. Yeah, I don't want to spend my life in D.C. I don't want my daughter to spend her life in D.C. There's a mission. We want to achieve the desired outcomes. We want to achieve the mission, and then we want to come back home. And that's all we want to do.
All right. Adam Smith, thank you so much.
Thanks for your time. I appreciate it, James.
Well, that was fun. You might have noted that I didn't challenge Adam on a few rather extraordinary claims during the interview. To be blunt, it was hard to keep up with them all, but I will point out 2 things that warrant a clarification. First, his description of the content of one book he described as pornography at a library in Jackson County is at odds with all the descriptions I could find of problematic books in the Fontana Regional Library System. The controversy over what some residents in Jackson County feel are inappropriate materials has been well covered, particularly by the Smoky Mountain News, so I find it puzzling that no one else has shared Adam's descriptions publicly. I'm not saying he's making it up, but I am skeptical. Second, gay frog research is a widely misunderstood, mostly conspiracy oriented theory. The thing you need to know is that the sex of many amphibians is determined in large part by environmental factors, not just their DNA. So it makes sense to look into the effects of chemical pollutants like atrazine on the embryonic development of frogs, because we really don't want entire species to go extinct if one sex is eliminated by something we're pouring into the ecosystem, right? The idea that it's all about woke research of some kind was invented by disgraced podcaster Alex Jones. There's a good article from the journal Environmental Humanities if you want to read the backstory. I put links to both issues in the show notes. There's also a link to Adam's campaign website when you can learn more about him, because he didn't actually talk much about himself in the interview. Also, I've invited Chuck Edwards to sit for an interview, but he hasn't responded one way or the other. If you've got any feedback or suggestions, send them to jamesh@folklore.com. Thanks for listening.